It is 1 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Well, it's 1 o'clock Eastern time. So make sure that's clear. All right, great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. For those that don't know who I am, my name is Steve Teresi. I'm the Director of Training and Technical Services here at JL Audio. I'm located down in sunny South Florida, just a couple of miles north of the main headquarters for JL Audio. I have Mr. Kevin Ferry up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Please say hello, Kevin.
Hello, everybody.
He and I are going to be minding the chat areas for both Facebook Live and here on WebEx. And over in Southern California, we have Rob Haynes. Say hello, Rob. Hello. There you go. You avoided the temptation there. Okay, so Rob's going to be presenting for us today. Just a couple of things. These sessions are intentionally designed to be viewed online, and we are very sensitive to your time. In this session, we're hoping is going to be done between 30 and 45 minutes, pending questions and interactions and things of that nature. We do value your time and respect it, so we don't want to go too long if we can help it, but we like doing these sessions because it gets a good communication with our key people out there, our dealers, our consumers, and whatnot. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get Rob to take over and take it away, Rob.
So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. This is a training I'm excited about. It's kind of an overview, an introduction to our Stealthbox family at JL Audio. This is without a doubt a product we all hold close to heart because a lot of work behind the scenes in terms of development and production, which doesn't get seen by a lot of people, yields just amazing results and enclosures. So the agenda for this session, we'll briefly discuss what is a Stealthbox, a little bit of the history. I think we may have someone on the WebEx, Steve, that was around way back in the early 90s when Stealthbox and SmartBox were first started. We'll talk about...
Did you just call me old in front of all these people?
I did.
Thanks.
We'll get into the R&D process to the best of our abilities without spilling some of our secrets. We'll discuss the production and then the end results, which is really what you guys get to see when you put a Stealthbox in a vehicle. Well, ideally, you don't see it because they're supposed to be out of sight, but you'll definitely hear it, and the results and the results are without a doubt something else. These are fantastic pieces, in my opinion, to the car audio industry. It's a premium piece. I think it's great for those long-standing JL customers who don't want big enclosures in their car anymore. Really, there's a Stealthbox, I think, for just about anyone out there. And it's a really cool line, and I'm glad we can kind of discuss some of this stuff because there is a lot of stuff that goes in behind the scenes that people don't get to see. So with that said, what is Stealthbox? Well, they are vehicle-specific subwoofer systems. As we were kind of just alluding to, they're designed to be stealthy, out of sight, or at least out of the way. Obviously, under the seat of a truck, you can't hide it. But you're not going to lose foot space. You're not going to lose really any major storage space. That's the whole idea with the Stealthbox system, is to be stealthy. They don't have to be 100% invisible, but they're going to minimize any space that may be taken by a more traditional enclosure. They're designed to be optimized to the vehicle's cabin acoustically. They are made out of 100% fiberglass, which is how we're able to conform them so nicely to the vehicles and make sure we get proper airspace. We develop and build all of our Stealthboxes in South Florida in the facility Steve was saying he's a couple miles north of. We're based in Miramar, Florida. It's right smack dab in the middle of Miami and Fort Lauderdale. And in addition to building thousands of speakers a day, in our wood enclosures, all of our fiberglass products are also made in-house. That's our Stealthboxes, the fiberglass marine enclosures, powersports products are all done in our South Florida facility. So that's something, again, that we're really, really excited about. And that's actually, I think, one of my favorite parts when we do tours of the facility is walking through the fiberglass department and the paint shop and the prep areas. And you really get to see the amount of detail that goes into every single Stealthbox that's built in-house. So Stealthbox came out in the early 90s. The first Stealthbox came out in 1991 for a Ford Mustang. And I'm pretty sure I know why the Ford Mustang was the first Stealthbox. Lucio had one.
Because everybody was driving those at that time. They were wildly popular. not really. Yeah, that was Lou's car. We used his for the first one. Rob, it's funny that you actually mentioned smart boxes too. Smart boxes, that's the precursor to stealth box. Those came first. And we learned a lot of valuable lessons with smart boxes, and they essentially got smarter and it became stealth boxes. The image that's on there now is fantastic. That the display on the left, that was actually part of our first ever CES booth that the guys went out to. And what's interesting about it is the driver in there is a 10W5. It was a dual voice coil woofer. And again, this is going way back. And there's the amplifier is inside of the enclosure. And there was a way that you could route the wires outside of it so you can make the connection for the signals and all that stuff. Obviously, for the woofer, you just run wires over to it. But if you look carefully, you'll notice it's the ported enclosure. That would actually help keep the amp cool. And we knew the size of the amplifier, so we could account for any displacements that might be in there. So we could actually fine tune the whole thing. And that was a spectacular enclosure. I believe he used that for competition at some point as well. And one thing, Rob, that you touched on that I thought was really cool is Stealthbox is for JL Audio. I consider it a defining product. And people often wonder what makes JL Audio different. And if we had the opportunity and we can bring them for a tour, Stealthbox is really a very good example of what makes us different as a company. You can make a speaker anywhere, you can make a box anywhere, but most of what JL Audio does is application specific. We target a specific application for the product and it's intended to excel in that application. So, as a quick joke, you could take this box here and you could throw it in a Camaro, and other than the Ford Chevy debate, it would play. It wouldn't perform all that well. It was never designed for that application. But Stealthbox is the epitome of application-specific product. It's dialed in. Color, contour, performance, everything about it is dialed in. And Rob, again, you brought up the tour. The tour is huge. The tour is gigantic. When you look at what we do in terms of real estate, focused on fiberglass molding and finishing of stealth boxes, it's disproportionate. We have this enormous amount of activity around a product category that does well for us, mind you, but it's not exactly like the hugest JL Audio's business. But I always contend that it's one of the most important categories, because if you want to know what makes JL Audio special, get a stealth box in your vehicle, listen to it, and you'll see what makes JL Audio special. I saw a comment on Facebook early on that, some people actually consider what vehicle to buy based upon if we have a stealth box for it or not. And that tells you something special about the category, that we really fine tune these. And frankly, from the days of this box, this 1991 enclosure, to what we're doing today, we're much better at it today than we were back then. These things are only getting better. And I think I've gone too long, but I think, some of the insiders, what goes into this, in terms of function and performance, it's a big part of what makes JL Audio special.
No, that was awesome, Steve. Thanks. Again, I think we're all excited because we don't really get to train as in depth or talk about Stealthbox. So it's cool that you're able to, obviously relive some of those cool memories. And this is just a category we get excited about. It's hard to not just start going on and on and on. But the application base is big for me. Like Steve said, you could put this Mustang box in the Camaro, but it probably wouldn't function as well. Which is why we actually had a Camaro stealth box, which is that one up in the top right. Perfectly designed for... Not stealth per se, but you gotta remember a lot of, a hatchback, I guess you can call a Camaro a hatchback, a fastback. That was still optimized for the vehicle. Yes, it took up a little bit of space compared to the one in the spare tire well, but compared to a normal box, and that being tucked up, if I remember correctly, that one went up against the rear, towards the rear of the trunk and fired towards the cabin. The way it loads off the...
Yeah, it was wonderful. Sorry, I'm just jazzed up. This thing was a monster. Obviously, it's physically large, but when you opened up the rear, the hatch area down in that well, this kind of sat down in that area. It didn't go all the way down as a secondary section, but it didn't go all the way down. It just stayed on the top, and it actually had two bent steel brackets that came with it, with a motorized actuator that bolted together. So you could actually hit a button and the whole thing would motorize out of the well, so you could access the area underneath. So you could put your amplifiers underneath and still access them using the motorization. And those were three 10W6s. And if you took, back then, again, of course, what we have today is very different, but a 600-watt amplifier, bridge 4 mono in that thing, it absolutely hammered. I don't remember ever seeing driver failures either, because you had 3 speakers on only 600 watts. But the loading that you're talking about, tremendous. That was huge. And the finish was basically just gel coat, and you'd have to sand it and paint it yourself, because we don't know what color the vehicle is, right? So that customization was left to the hands of the retailer or the customer if they wanted to deal with it. But that was really cool. That was an attempt at kind of like a massive version of a stealth box. Never intended to be fully stealth. That's why I wanted to make fun of it a little bit. Unlike the other one there that
Intrepid.
yeah, so that you can actually tell that the spare tire would fit down around that. So it would raise up the spare tire ever so slightly, and then you would still have the full-size spare tire and a subwoofer. And that was really what Stealthbox was about. Minimally invasive is a term I like. Minimally invasive. They don't do much to invade in your space or draw your eye to them. So that was always a goal.
Yeah. And obviously, as times have changed, the popularity of certain vehicles, now we see, without a doubt, the biggest seller for stealth boxes are trucks. We didn't have all these big crew cab trucks back then. So as times have changed, we've transitioned in the stealth box family as well, where now the main focus, I'd say the majority of stealth box is trucks, the F-150s, the Dodge Rams, Silverados, your Toyotas, with under seat or behind the seat options where there's not a lot of room to put a normal subwoofer. That's also where the benefit of us having those thin woofers, the TW5, TW3, and TW1s really come into play. But we've also transitioned stealth box to the powersports side as well. In the last couple of years, as we've embraced powersports in the UTV market, your Can-Ams, your the Polarises, you name it, we have a stealth box for just about any UTV out there. And again, just like the car models or truck models, minimally invasive, behind glove boxes in the dash, under seats. Again, it's all about not taking up a lot of space, but not compromising the base as well. Just like all of the vehicle stealth boxes, powersports ones are all listened to and optimized for the vehicle as well. So starting from that single Ford Mustang stealth box, right now, I actually counted this in the price list the other day. We have 100 different stealth box enclosures that cover over 80 different vehicles. And if you factor in all the different carpet colors and paint options, I think there's like 148 different SKUs available for stealth box. And right now in South Florida, we average about 230 stealth boxes built a week in our fiberglass department, which is pretty crazy. A lot of I was gonna write notes, but I didn't. If you wouldn't mind, Steve, if you have them, when we get to the production part, if you can bring up some of the notes from Julio, that'd be some cool stuff to discuss. But before we get to production, we need to talk about the development. What makes a stealth box? Because you can't just buy something and have it made, put your woofer in it and say, ta-da, here's an awesome vehicle-specific enclosure. All of that starts in our R&D department based in South Florida. We're our very, very talented R&D crew. A lot of steps. I actually had reached out to Mike West, who is our one of the managers of our R&D department, and I said, give me a brief list of the steps that go through the R&D process for a stealth box. And I got like a 3-page document that was nothing but bullet points. It's a lot of work. Unfortunately, we can't divulge all. Yeah. Fortunately, we can't divulge all of it because there are some secrets that go into some of the testing. But what I can tell you is some of the other factors that come in. So when a vehicle comes in for stealth box, and we're always looking for the newest vehicles. I think we actually the other day on Facebook put out a reach out to our fans that we're looking for the new Dodge. So, loan it to us, we'll borrow it, and you'll get a free stealth box out of it. So we're always...
People ask frequently, how do you figure out which vehicles to get to do stealth boxes? Well, in the early days, it was really easy. We looked in the parking lot and said, that's a cool car, we'll do that one, because we just needed to do it. So Lucio's car was a logical choice, and there was a couple of other ones. Then as time went on, we started targeting vehicles that might be exciting. I remember there was this, for the Nissan, Rob, I saw that, in preparation for this, you had found a couple of the Nissan boxes, right? Well, the Nissan box, there was a dude that was running around South Florida on the competition scene. And we decided, hey, why don't we make a stealth box for that? And we did. So that kind of leathery wrapped one that you saw, Rob, that was for the Nissan, and that's how we would find things. It was, in the area that we had some access to it. It was great. And the cool thing is, as the company is scaled up, we have a lot more people, so the parking lot has a lot more cars. So we have a lot more targets to pick from. And if we've gone to the level of putting it out on Facebook, that means that that particular vehicle, we don't have access to it at the factory. And we've checked with local retailers to find out what they have. And now we're broadening the search, and now we're starting to ask other people for it. It's not easy because we need the vehicle in the facility to do testing on it, not just to scan it, because we could do that pretty quickly, but to actually go through and do listening tests and fit tests and all those other things. It's not just as easy as, designing a box that happens to fit. It's got to be dialed in. And that's a little harder because you need it for longer periods of time.
I was flying back from the office about a year or two ago, and I was leaving the Fort Lauderdale airport, and I had my JL Audio Polo on, and a guy walking by stops and goes, and you get the, do you work for JL Audio? I'm like, well, no, I'm just wearing this, for the heck of it. Oh, yes, I do. He's like, oh, awesome. You guys borrowed my Dodge Ram 5 years ago. You had it for a month, but I got a kick-ass box out of it, and it was worth it. Like, totally random airplane conversation, But
it's more like fiberglass for another year.
Yeah. So when a vehicle does come in, the first thing our R&D crew does is they actually strip it down. They inspect the vehicle, but they also collect what we call research data, where we actually go in and we'll take electrical measurements of the factory audio system. So we have a database to help tech support. So we know if the OEM system is crossed over, or what's the frequency response of the different speakers in the car. All of this stuff, even though it doesn't necessarily reflect the Stealthbox development, it's important data for our tech support team to have so we can further help our dealers and consumers that call in for help. So we collect that data. After that, we then go through the vehicle and we look for the best location that the enclosure can go. And after they determine a couple places, they'll put a regular just wood MDF enclosure where they think the woofer should be, the Stealthbox, and then they're going to take a listen to it, make sure it's the best location for a subwoofer. So it's kind of unique. We talk about this minimally invasive, but they actually do the first ever test with a regular enclosure to determine if that's the right spot to put it. Is that going to be the optimal spot for subwoofer performance in addition to not taking up a lot of space? Once they determine the place for where the enclosure or Stealthbox is going to be, that's when we scan the vehicle. And this is where we've gotten very modern over the last decade or so. Back in the day, Stealthbox was a very long process to develop because you were essentially just making a bunch of random fiberglass enclosures until you found one that worked and sounded right.
A lot of clay, a lot of chewing gum, and sawdust, and just throw it all together, make a shape and make it fit. A lot of sanding. It was very labor intensive. Rob, if I may, there's something I want to add about determining the best location that may be insightful to people. You already mentioned that we tend to target trucks a lot more than SUVs. And at first blush, it might seem like that's an odd choice. Like an SUV, it's got tons of room, but it's got tons of room and the person who bought it wants that room. So if you try to put a normal box in there, it's a much harder obstacle to overcome. People don't want to give up the space that they paid for, right? So stealth boxes became a logical choice. And I do recall a number of years ago, a long time ago, Ford came out with the Sport Track, which was kind of a pickup truck style thing that was fairly compact on the inside, but there was this area behind the seat that looked like we could do a stealth box. So we did everything. Now we kind of went through the whole process, figuring out what's going to fit back there. And we actually had two options that we could go with. One was a single 8-inch subwoofer that had room for an amplifier, and the other one was two 8-inch subwoofers that didn't have room for an amplifier. And everywhere we looked, we couldn't find a suitable place to put an amplifier other than where the box was going. And we realized that a single 8, although it sounded really good, would not sell well. Nobody would spend the kind of money a stealth box typically would cost for a single 8. And the dual 8, while it performed a lot better, if you installed it, you had no place for the amplifier. So despite going through most of the development cycle, developing two different versions, we wound up selling 0 of them. We never went to market because we could not overcome the obstacle of knowing the application. We knew that the box would be great, but you'd have to put the amplifier on the seat because there was nowhere else to put it. So here was a great application that we couldn't even come up with a solution because of the size of the amplifiers and where the subwoofer had to go. There's been a number of them over the years where we got to a certain point, we just had to pull the plug and say, we can't solve this solution to our level of satisfaction, and we walk away from it. That's hard because obviously we spent a lot of money and time trying to develop something, and to walk away with nothing is a tough one. But if we get to the point now that we're going to scan the vehicle, all of those things have already been considered, so we could save a lot of time and money. So go ahead, Rob. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all. That's awesome to hear. So yeah, but our R&D team throughout the last year, on top of the investment in the materials and computers, they've gone through extensive testing in 3D modeling, or and extensive training in 3D modeling software, CAD programs, and now what we do, we'll build as we have what we call the magic wand. And with what's in Bill's right hand there, he can scan a vehicle, whether it's in this case. Looks like the rear area of a UTV, or if it's a trunk or under the floor of a truck seat. But he can take a scan and then it populates a 3D version of that in his computer. So that's really cool. So now we can essentially, instead of making a bunch of random enclosures, we can actually get a 3D model of the environment that the enclosure is going to be built around. Once that is loaded into 3D modeling software, they can then, in the software, also design the enclosure that's going to contour and fit to that area. Also, it allows them to make sure the enclosure is going to be designed to be within the recommended target volume or specs of the subwoofer. You know, if the woofer is a recommended one cubic foot woofer, for example, when they model that enclosure in this 3D program, not only are they making sure that it fits perfectly, but it's going to be a cubic foot to start, because that's what the woofer recommends. That could change later on, and we'll talk about that. So after we have all of this done in 3D modeling, this is where we start to get to some of the tests. And they'll start to model some different test enclosures out of different materials. That's where we get into some of the secrets. So after we have these test enclosures, this is what we're going to use to determine fit. This is what's going to be used to help the fiberglass department make the molds for production. But once we get to the point where we can put an actual enclosure in the vehicle with a speaker, this is where the initial testing now begins. So we'll take the enclosure, they're going to test fit it, they make sure it works. If it goes behind panels or under seats, all of that stuff functions the way it would if the Stealthbox wasn't there, or at least within the parameters of what the Stealthbox is going to require. Sometimes it may mean, you know, there's always restrictions. I remember the center console Stealthboxes, you know, you're going to lose some of the depth in your center console. But again, they're going to test and make sure all of that functionality is still the same. After that, that's when they start to listen to it. And when we listen to it, there's a lot of critical listening going on. And this is where sometimes the volume of the Stealthbox may alter. We often get asked about the airspace. You know, what's the airspace on this Stealthbox model? And usually in tech and training, we say, I don't know, probably close to spec. Because they'll listen to it and they'll add or remove volume from the enclosure depending how it's performing in the car. So if we need a little more low end, they'll make those changes. If it's too peaky, they'll make those changes. So the Stealthbox enclosure may not always be perfectly to spec because it's optimized to how the cabin is performing in those low frequencies. So a lot of critical listening and lots of adjustments and changes with more critical listening, with more adjustments and more critical listening. All of that goes on way before we can even get into production. Again, it's not just about being minimally invasive, but 100% optimized to the vehicle. And that's why Steve was joking, you know, when people say they look at what Stealthboxes are around before they buy a vehicle, it's because they know they are going to get the best darn performance out of that Stealthbox, because it is not just designed for the aesthetics, but the acoustical performance as well. So another thing that then also goes through after the initial testing, this is how the mounts have to be determined. Remember, there's no pre-made mounts for a Stealthbox. All that bracketry, how it mounts, the hardware, all of that's determined by the R&D team as well. And they'll start cutting and bending metal to make brackets. They determine what type of hardware, whether it's bolts, nuts, tie downs, however it's being mounted. All of this is designed by our team. They have to analyze the vehicle to find safe places to mount. In many cases, we try to use existing holes, if possible, to secure the stealth box, so the installers aren't having to drill extra holes in a vehicle. So a lot of work goes through this development process. After all those prototypes brackets are done, they can now physically mount the enclosure and then take an even deeper listen to it. And again, that's where we look at adding and removing the volume. Also, are there any rattles or unwanted noises? You can't have an expensive enclosure in your car. I know with bass, you're gonna get some rattles here and there, but are you hearing like panels that shouldn't be rattling? Is the seat shaking too much? So this is all stuff that gets looked at to make sure that it's the ideal application.
I can't tell you how many times we've actually worked on vehicles, factory, from the factory, we get the vehicle and we develop a stealth box, we get it in and mount it, and the factory panels vibrate like crazy. Several of the boxes, I can't recall if we have any current ones. We used to ship it with padding to fit behind panels to stop them from vibrating, because there's just no other way to do it. And we were fearful that people would think it was the box because it was right near it. But that's a pain in the neck when you got those unwanted rattles and vibrations, because of course everyone's going to point to the sub and say, well, it's the sub that's making noise. No, well, yeah, but not the way you think. It's making noise that's making everything vibrate. We've actually seen where electronics in a vehicle, when the subwoofers put in there, the electronics inside the casing will, the circuit boards in the box will vibrate, making a buzzing noise. So this is no small task here to find all of these things, and it's certainly no small task to fix them when we find them. And we do what we can on that, and well, there you go.
And then after the approval, usually it's Manville that takes a listen to them after the big boss man and his amazing critical ear signs off on it. That's when R&D starts to work with our marketing team to develop the manuals, installation, take the images of everything, and then we can sign off and send it to production. And
it used to be a challenge too, because digital cameras back in the early 90s there wasn't a whole lot of options, and it was really, you couldn't like fax in an image or anything like that. And it was a challenge. I remember we had this old Apple camera. Yes, Apple made a camera, and it had this little mechanism on the front to make sure you got the focal length right. It was a pain in the butt, and it took forever, not to take the picture to stage the picture. It took a while. Then once you got the picture, you had to wait forever for it to upload into whatever computer could run the software to take that image. So that used to be a huge challenge, and we've overcome that.
Let's start talking about the production side of Stealthbox now. As we mentioned earlier, they are built in our fiberglass department in South Florida using a really cool method called resin transfer molding, or RTM to keep it short. And we'll talk about what that is in just a moment. Some other key things to know though about Stealthbox is 100% quality control. So not only are all of our speakers that are built in the United States 100% quality controlled at the end of the speaker assembly line, all assembled goods are checked as well. So when we do a stealth box, after it's put together, that's also tested to make sure there's no air leaks, that it's wired up properly, there's no strip screws or anything. So all aspects of it, from the speaker to an assembled enclosure, are tested before it's packaged up and sent out the door. And for me, the cool thing about Stealthbox, and especially this is where that resin transfer molding technique comes in, it allows us to build and ship a Stealthbox and have it on your doorstep in 3 business days, which for a vehicle-specific fiberglass enclosure that fits like a glove, that's a pretty awesome feat. So let's talk about how we're able to do that. So all stealth boxes essentially start as a mold. There's a top and a bottom, or a front and a back. So there's 2 pieces that are eventually going to be combined together. And a lot of work goes into these molds. Our team, part of our team in fiberglass is actually cleaning and wiping them down. After every enclosure, the molds are cleaned and they're inspected, because we can only use them for so many times. So if there's an issue with the mold, we're going to have an issue with the actual enclosure. So a lot of inspection happens on the molds once an actual fiberglass piece is removed from it. But what our team's going to do is, once the mold is good, they line the molds with a good amount of fiberglass mat, and they force them down. And there's a lot of, all the details from the Stealthbox are in the mold. So the grooves, any channels, and they're going to work that fiberglass mat into any grooves or channels that may be there. They then put the top of the mold on, which essentially creates a sandwich. Then this is where that cool resin transfer molding process comes in. If you look closely, you'll notice on the top left corner of the image, you'll see some white PVC pipe, and that's what all the hoses are coming down from. That's a vacuum system. So when we put the top of the Stealthbox mold on and connect that blue hose to the side, that creates a vacuum seal, sandwiching and sealing the fiberglass inside that mold. This is an older picture, but in the picture he's injecting a mixture of the chemicals you need to cure fiberglass. So resin, hardener, the catalyst. Now we have a really cool machine where all of the molds have a barcode. They scan the barcode and the machine puts in the correct amount of chemicals every single time. While our guys are pretty darn good at it, the machine's perfect, and it makes sure we don't waste extra chemicals that we don't need to be wasting. So then what's going to happen after we inject all of the chemicals into the mold, that thicker yellow hose you see that's connected to that reservoir in the middle, that again is a vacuum system. And the vacuum from that actually pulls the chemicals into the center. So by pulling it into the center, the fiberglass is actually absorbing the materials to help it harden as they're seeping through the enclosure. And then any excess material that's not absorbed, or if there's too much in the mold itself, any excess chemicals then pulled out into that reservoir in the center there. So this is a really cool way to not only make fiberglass, but to do a lot of enclosures in a really quick, efficient manner. This is actually how a lot of boat hulls are made. And we had some marine partners come by on a tour one day, and they were shocked that we had such an extravagant setup for what they called little fiberglass work. And I'm like, little fiberglass? Like, to me, an F-150 Stealthbox is pretty darn big, like 6 feet. But I guess when you compare it to the hull of a boat, it is a little on the small side.
Definitely would consider it small in their eyes.
Yeah. But what's cool about this process, I remember when I worked in retail and I had my shops, to build a fiberglass enclosure from scratch where you're laying fleece and then laying mat and you're brushing brushing or patting on your chemicals, it's at minimum a 1.5 to 2 day process to get it done right. And then there's all the prep work to sand it, especially if it's not being covered in carpet. A Stealthbox can go from this point right here where he's injecting the chemicals to being hard and cure and as smooth as my table in about 2.5 to 3 hours. So we use a very hot mixture that allows it to cure very quickly. So this is how, one of the reasons we're able to do that 3-day build to your doorstep program. So this is a very, very cool process. It's efficient. It minimizes the wastefulness of materials, whether it's fiberglass mat, whether it's the chemicals themselves. But this is the key and heart to Stealthbox design, is this RTM method, and it yields perfect results every single time. You look like you wanted to say something, Steve?
No, I just wanted to add that, a lot of the skilled labor that we have, that the people that actually do this, they're really good at it, but relying on them to be really good at it is not a very efficient way to grow. And with as many Stealthboxes as we're making, the streamlining of the process has really been very beneficial. The barcoding, our guys know exactly what they're doing, and they'll pull that trigger the right amount to get the resin to flow into the mold. They'll get it pretty darn close every single time, but to get better, we need better than pretty darn close. And we can actually calculate it out and program it. That's fantastic. Even the whole process of RTM, the old method was with a chop gun. Well, the old method was a dude, taking fiberglass and laying it into the mold. Now we got a chop gun, and basically that chops up fiberglass and mixes it with the resin and sprays it into the mold. Then we had to roll out each layer and pop all the air bubbles and make sure we didn't have pockets of air that would cause a brittle box or a resonant box that would have a hollow sound to it. So what RTM allows us to do is, with that method, it was one at a time, right? You can only do one at a time in a chop booth. So one mold, move it. One mold, move it. With resin transfer molding, it doesn't matter what the next box is. You connect everything the same way, and you scan, and it pushes the resin in. Very, very fast, very, very efficient in that regard. Minimal waste. There's so many great things about it. And with the vacuum system that Rob described, since it's pulling air out of the mold, There's no pockets of air that we have to worry about once the resin goes in. There's no popping of the bubbles. There are no bubbles. There is no air. So that's a really great system that we didn't invent it. We learned about it and we said, wow, that could be really beneficial. Let's see how we could do that. And, being frugal as we tend to be, we developed our own system. We built our own vacuum lines. We did all of that ourselves because we had that ability. So we built our own structure, which is why the boat builders, when they've come to see us, they're like, where did you get all of this? Because it's not like there's, an easy way of doing this, especially for small parts, as they call them. Well, we built it ourselves. We had the ability, so we developed it, and here's what we got. And it says, wow, we do our boats this way. And it's like, really? So we started scaling up, and some of the larger things that we do now are a result of that collaboration with some of those boat builders. So didn't mean to take away more time, but I thought that would be interesting for people to hear.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So after the RTM process is done and the fiberglass is cured, we take the two pieces out of the molds. Any excess material is we grind it off, so we have two perfect sides, if you will. A lot of work then goes into bonding those two pieces together, and the bond is very important for a stealth box. Obviously, we don't want to see any bonding joints through the carpet or if it's paint. But it's also key for the structure. It helps make sure we don't have any air leaks. There's no rigidity or flex in the enclosure. So if you ever come to the facility and get to go on a tour, you'll see the work that goes in. They will bond it, they'll sand and grind it down, they'll bond it, they'll add more, they'll sand and grind it down, and a lot of inspection goes into this process to make sure that there's no structural or acoustical issues once the enclosure is actually put together. Once they are, I guess you could say assembled, once the two pieces become one, they then actually go into inventory. So one thing that we do that allows us to respond quick to Stealthbox, if it's a popular model, essentially anything that's a truck or a powersports, those raw enclosures actually go into inventory on a shelf. If it's a Stealthbox that's not one of the more popular ones, we will actually build those ones to order, and they'll go straight from the bond to get wrapped or painted. But many times our team will take a raw enclosure off the shelf, and then it either gets carpeted or painted. And we have some really skilled guys. If you've ever looked at a Stealthbox, most of the models, it's one sheet of carpet. It's not multiple pieces. And these guys are really talented. They know how to work, and we use a backless carpet, so it's a little easier to work with. Totally different carpet than what you see on our wooden enclosures. And that allows them to stretch and work it in. And one of the cool things, if you ever get to go to the factory, is you'll see they hold their razor blades so they can cut the carpet as needed. But the back end of their blades, it's very dull and shiny because they use that and they force and work the carpet into all the grooves and corners of the enclosure to make sure that the glue bond on both the enclosure and the carpet can get contact and mold nicely with one another. Likewise, on the paint side of things, all of our powersports models, those then go into our paint booth where we do the black texture paint on them, and then again add any of the hardware that's needed, rivets, mounting holes, all of that stuff. But the guys that will do the carpeting on this, it's fun to watch them, man, because they will take one massive sheet of carpet and somehow make it perfectly conform to this 6-foot F-150 enclosure, and it's seamless.
There are no work instructions in this area. This is 100% skilled. These guys know what they're doing, and they know how to approach each one of the boxes, and it takes a long time before they're allowed to work in this area, because there is no first you do A, then you do B. You're carpeting a bowling ball practically, and you have to kind of know what you're doing in order to do it effectively. And we have a fantastic team of people that have been with us for many, many, many years, and they've gotten really, really good at doing the finished work on the Stealthbox products. And it's crazy. I don't want to take any thunder away from you, Rob, but you see all of this stuff. You see the fiberglass, being laid up, all the attention to detail there. You see these guys working on these enclosures here, making sure everything's just right. There's certain areas that they'll literally do hand painting to make sure everything is blended in nice. They'll drop the woofer in, and ultimately at the end, they're stealth boxes. You don't even see it. It's like, to me, it's mind-boggling. We put all this effort into making it beautiful so that nobody sees it, but we do. And our customers ultimately do, and they know. And that again goes back to the beginning of why we care so much about it, because our customers have come to expect this from an application product. Sorry, Robin.
No, it's a great point. And even like for the few times you do see it, I kind of think of it like with our Gotham. our Gotham, we ship it upside down, which means the bottom, which you never see, gets the same love as the rest of it, because first impressions matter when you open that box. And you may not see all of the stealth box all the time, but when you first take it out of its packaged enclosure, you know, the first impressions matter. You're going to see the thought and details that went into this. So after it gets wrapped, it then gets moved over toward the next area, and this is where it's going to go through its final assembly. So this is where we're going to put in the terminal cups. We're going to wire up the woofer and mount it. Like all areas in our facility that use air guns, these are constantly checked to make sure the torque is where it's supposed to be, so we don't strip out screws, destroy the fiberglass, or cause any other issues. After it goes through that quality control testing I mentioned earlier, it then goes to the packaging area where we're going to wrap it up in a bag with all the materials. I see Steve smiling. Unfortunately, I don't have a good picture of the process for packaging, but it is really cool. If you've ever opened a Stealthbox, you'll notice it's essentially in a box surrounded by a cloud of foam, and it's two-part expanding foam. And what our team will do is they'll spray this, essentially it's two chemicals. When you combine them, it creates a reaction that turns into expanding foam. So they'll spray the inside of a cardboard box and the foam will start to grow. And then they'll put the enclosure in that plastic bag inside of it, and then the foam will actually start to take shape around the enclosure. And we actually even, again, the details, we actually even puncture a little hole in that bag. So as the foam grows around that bag, it releases air so the air won't push down on the speaker cone. They'll then put more foam.
Learn by mistake,
Yeah, you do learn by mistake. We'll then spray more foam on the top of all of that, which creates the top half. And now we have this cloud, if you will, that completely protects the stealth box from shipping. I think original stealth boxes, we had cardboard inserts, but they would start to rub against the bag or they would rub against the carpet and it would cause shiny spots or damages, or they weren't as protected. So this self-expanding
problem in the early days.
Yeah.
So the boxes that you mentioned at the very beginning of our presentation, those had a front panel that were, many of them had a front panel that was made out of wood that was bonded to the fiberglass on the back, and that wood was covered with a vinyl wrap that was color matched to the interior to try to blend against some of the vinyl materials that were in a lot of the, like the old Mazda B2200 or whatever it was. And during shipment, that material would get very shiny and it would look really, really bad upon receipt. Or the carpet would get really shiny because it was, during transit, it would shake a little bit and rub against the cardboard and cause those shiny spots. So we were actually replacing a lot of these very expensive enclosures and shipping them all over the place, only to find that they were still getting damaged. So the process that you just described, Rob, is a fantastic one. It's certainly not cheap. The different materials that blend together for that expanding foam, that stuff's expensive. The machine's expensive. Everything about this is expensive, but it's a lot cheaper than shipping multiple boxes out there and having a customer be disappointed with what should be our pinnacle product. So every bit of this is all intended to make sure that our customers get an experience that's worthy of the name JL Audio Stealth Box. And it's a great thing that you talked about the poking a hole in the bag and all that stuff, because all of these are lessons learned of generations of working with these products. And we've learned, we've taken the hits and we've gotten better.
So all of this hard work, from the development to the production to the packaging, at the end of the day, it's invisibility that shows. Whether you have a powersports application, this is a slingshot with some of the marine components. Whether it's a behind the seat or the new Jeeps with the quarter panel enclosures, at the end of the day, you're going to get the best possible base performance in an enclosure that takes up as minimal space. It aesthetically blends in with the vehicle. And, like Steve said, I love it. He said, it's the pinnacle of JL Audio. And I really hope this session shows that. Yes, these are not the least expensive enclosures out there, but there's a reason for it. It's years of research. It's years of perfecting a manufacturing process. It's, years of perfecting shipping process. But at the end of the day, when you get a stealth box, you are getting the best from JL Audio. There's no corners cut. No, from R&D and all of the investment in learning CAD software, the hardware and programs, the cost of sending our guys to SolidWorks World every year or whatever the events they go to, down to the cost of developing an RTM process, This is a huge investment for JL Audio, and I think the end result really shows. And I think those that have listened or used stealth boxes will agree. So that's the end of my spiel. So I'm going to close out the keynote, and we can tackle any questions that may not have been answered yet.
Awesome, Rob. Thanks so much. You did great justice to a category that it's very near and dear to our hearts. So thank you for all of the attention you put into that. That's cool. Did we miss anything on Facebook? Or are we good on the questions? The WebEx has been pretty quiet.
We are pretty good. We got a couple guys asking for their specific vehicles. And
it's funny that came up, and I'm going to interrupt you real quick because Rob just mentioned also that stealth boxes are not exactly inexpensive. They're never cheap, right? But they're not inexpensive either. So very early on in the whole the family of stealth boxes, the first thing that we would always get from retailers and consumers is, "Oh my God, these things are so expensive." And then the next question is, how come you don't make one for my vehicle? So I think it all goes down to that, is that they, in my mind, and this is kind of an awkward thing to talk about openly, is there has to be a value proposition for stealth boxes. And value is not just the cost of the item, it's whether it's worth it to the end user. And I contend that stealth box is worth it for most customers at the end. If you're looking to hammer and just like break windows as you drive down the road, stealth box is not your product. There's other ways of getting that kind of thing. Rob also mentioned that we focus on SUVs and trucks, and there's a reason for that. Those applications are particularly challenging. And there's a lot of sedans that people say, "Oh, it'd be really cool if you guys made one that kind of fit over here or fit over there." But a lot of times in a sedan, there's some room that's not often used, usually under like a parcel tray or something. You could fit a box or a single 10 or a 12, or maybe a pair of 10s or even a pair of 12s. And depending on the model, it would probably be a lot less expensive to go with that route. A standard, form factor, one of our HO boxes or something like that would fit in there and give excellent performance. Maybe not quite as detailed as a stealth box, but it'd be a lot less expensive than the fiberglass molded version. So the value there is for a dollar per dollar spent. A more traditional form factor in those vehicles might be a better option. But on trucks and SUVs, it becomes a very different value proposition because the space that you'd be taking up is worth a lot more than anything that a stealth box might cost you. And obviously the cost of stealth box is in vehicle specific, so the volume's lower. The fiberglass itself, the carpeting, all the detail that Rob just shared with us, all of that has a cost associated with it. So when we select vehicles, like the ones that are on Facebook that were asking for theirs, when we select a vehicle, it'll be those vehicles that have a very special application to them, where it's unlikely you're going to get similar performance without taking up a significant amount of room. Those are prime candidates for stealth boxes, and we'll look at those as quickly as we can. I'm rambling a little bit, but the process that we go through is labor intensive. We've gotten faster at it, but we have to be very careful about choosing which ones we go down the path because there is still time associated with it. I think we've done a pretty good job in recent years of targeting applications that make a lot of sense. But we love hearing which ones are exciting to people because those will very quickly percolate to the top of the list as potential candidates.
Neil is asking if there's any difference between the drivers in the stealth boxes and the normal ones that you would buy separately.
They are regular drivers, TW3, W3V3, whatever it may be. It's a we don't have different. The only time we really have different drivers per se is there's some changes on the home side for the TW5, and there's the W7 using the Gotham and Fathoms is a little different. But when it comes to stealth boxes, they're the same drivers that are available raw or in the wooden enclosures. I saw he also asked about what's done with the box to alter the response. That doesn't divulge any secrets. Sometimes it's just maybe removing some of the airspace inside, altering some of the dimensions. There's a couple things that go in there, but I probably would divulge secrets.
PFF.
There's one thing though, Rob, that you're a little misleading on your comment that we use the exact same drivers that we sell at retail. There are some cases that's not true. Sometimes on the back side of the speaker, there's some pleasantries that are put on, certain niceties that make the product look nicer, that don't really alter performance in any way, shape, or form. And since we're never intending for anyone to actually see the driver in a stealth box, sometimes we'll just remove those parts. So sometimes back in the day, we used to have like rubber boots that would fit on some of the magnet structures to make the magnets look prettier. Well, there's no reason to put that in a stealth box. You're not going to see that part of it ever. So we would remove that. But other than that, in terms of performance, in terms of actual what matters most in a speaker, it's exactly the same driver that we would normally sell. And if you would try to build a box that mimicked what a stealth box did, you could contact the tech support guys and we'll tell you as much as we possibly can about the details of it. And on that note, I know we talked earlier about asking about the volumes. They'll tell you what the recommended volume is and guide you towards, you might want to go a little bigger, a little smaller to get better performance. But there's a couple of key things that they can do for you. I kind of lost my train of thought of where I was going with that to help me out. The dimensions of the boxes. People say, can you give me the dimensions of the stealth box? It's like, that's like giving the dimensions of a lake. You can't, because it's a weird shape. And we can say, well, at its widest it's X, at the narrowest it's Y, or whatever. We can get a lot of that information, but the dimensions, it's a weird shape. It's a blob. We can't really give those dimensions very easily. And very often we found that people are asking because they want to put it in a different application.
Yeah.
What to say about that, Rob?
You can do it, but don't expect the proper results.
Right. And we've had a lot of people that work in our tech support department, and the one guy was always pretty funny when people say, hey, does the Ford box work in a Chevy? You can do whatever you'd like. We're not going to guarantee performance of it. You can place it over there and see how it sounds. But we know that when you put it in the application it's designed to, rock solid every time. We know what it's going to do because we've heard it. We've listened to it, like Rob said. Oh, Jim actually asked about a bandpass enclosure. We actually, years ago, we used to make wooden enclosures, bandpass wooden enclosures. Some of those are pretty spectacular. He was asking for a specific marine application, but there have been attempts at doing some bandpass enclosures for production. Not so much in Stealthbox, but in wooden enclosures. But yeah, that'd be neat. I think one of the problems with the marine applications for a specific one like that is different trim levels on different boats can cause major changes in these little, cubbies and areas that we tend to want to make a stealth type of system. It's hard. It's really hard because, first of all, boats, the volume, bad choice of words, the amount of business done for a product like that will probably be very different on the retail side of things. So that makes it a bit of a challenge. And different packages that you might get when you order your boat might hinder it from fitting. And those are things that are very difficult for us to control. At least with the automotive applications, we can identify the different trim levels a lot easier than we could with the boats. So that's why we tend to not do the same things. Now, there are some things that we do. Obviously, we have the canisters and whatnot that are more universal. But in terms of tucking something into a boat, that would be a challenge. I'll never say never, but it's going to be a lot harder to make that work out well.
I did see there was something on the Facebook chat about someone looking to purchase just the raw enclosures themselves. We don't do that. Stealth boxes are a package. And especially on the Jeep JLs, those use our TW1 enclosures, which use a ridiculously small amount of airspace compared to a more traditional 10. So, again, this goes back to like, can you put a Chevy box in a Ford? There's a reason we don't sell the enclosures by themselves because they're optimized for not just the car, but a specific pair of speakers as well. And yeah, you could maybe try to put something else in there, but you're not going to get the same amount of performance as you would with the driver that the enclosure was intended around.
Absolutely.
There have been cases back in the day where we had like a version of the box that if you wanted to pay a lot of money and change out the driver, you could work with the retailer about potentially doing that. But the direction we've gone lately, because of the confined spaces are getting even more confined, and our driver technology has allowed us to get much smaller in terms of physical mounting depths, that we're starting to use these very shallow drivers and maintaining a high level of performance. Back in the day, we had to modify and make room for the larger draw on a speaker, the depth of it. And sometimes other speakers might fit, right? So like a W6 might have fit where a W3 had fit. Of course, the cost of a W6 is significantly more, so the W3 would often be the go-to product so long as it performed for us. But those days are long behind us now. We we're really optimizing, like Rob said, for the shallower drivers because we can get the performance, and you'd be hard pressed to match that level of performance. And if you can, you could build a box and have at it. So, yeah.
If anybody happens to have a smart box for an 88 to 98 Chevy standard cab, please contact me. Because that would be cool for me. Claude would like to see an upgrade in the HD series, an HD 1201. I'd like to see Claude's electrical system to support that.
Check 2001 is what he was looking for.
Sorry, 2001. It was a 1204 and a 2001.
I wouldn't mind a 1204. That'd be a fun one. A multi-channel, really big amplifier. It's like two of the HD 600s slash 4s, but in one chassis for double that. I'd like that. That wouldn't be bad at all. But a 2000 watt regulated power supply amplifier would be a painful thing on a charging system. It'd be fun if you could do it. It'd be a lot of fun, no doubt about it. But that is not likely to happen, unfortunately.
Chris has a stealth box coming in with dual TW3s wired to 2 ohm. Wondering what amplifier would be best for that.
I'd say depending on how aggressive of a listener you are, anywhere in the 600 watt to 1000 watt range. I run 210 TW3s on a VX 1000/1i, which is, I think that's like into the black. You're voiding your warranty on our chart. But I don't listen to a lot of boosted music. I'm not an aggressive listener. So I would say
Chris answered exactly what I was going to interject.
He's very aggressive.
You really have to ask that question.
But I would say an XD or 600 watt XD or VXI amplifier, HD 751 if you got the charging system for it, RD 501, somewhere in that range would be a good setup.
Rob is conservative. He's trying to make sure that you don't have issues. If you know your limits, Chris, I'm looking at you. If you know your limits, you can get away with a little bit of extra power there. Just know that you are probably going to push it pretty hard. And if you have problems, don't come yelling at us. Right? We're giving you good advice, and you're probably going to ignore it. Just be mindful that if you set things right, you'll probably be okay. Give the system a break every now and again, and you'll be all right. I did see a chat, something in there that Jim was talking about the 1010 box for the old GM. Kevin, you mentioned the old GM. Maybe it's not the same one, but we used to have I think it was 3 10W5s. That thing hammered. That would have made Chris happy. That was a really impressive box. And I remember a retailer, he actually told me, he called it a smart box because he remembered the original ones. He says, I made it smarter. And what he actually did was he removed the middle woofer, and he basically increased the volume for the other 2 woofers. And it had the advantage of playing deeper, for sure, but the upper end response was not quite the same, so it lacked some of that impact. So yes, it was deeper. He was right about that, but yeah, I like the triple one better because much like Chris, I have a little bit of a heavy hand at times. I wanted that output. So.
Yeah, 310s, man. Now you got my brain cruising now.
That was cool. That thing was really cool. That was fun. Stealthbox development has always been kind of fun. You get to be creative, and building this team right now back in R&D, they do a really good job. And that scanning wand that Rob showed the image of, that really is, I hate using the term, it's overplayed, but it's a game changer. It's so much faster than what we used to do back in the day. Gary and the guys, they would literally, they would just take anything to try to create the shape because we had to make an imprint of that side area or that, the well area, whatever it was. We'd have to mimic that in some way that we could remove it and then build on it. So we take a plug of the vehicle, and we'd pull it out, and then from that we'd make a mold so that we could pull fiberglass off of it. It was a pain in the butt. 3 to 6 months would have taken for some of these boxes to go from concept to production. And now we can do it a lot faster than that using some of the technology we got. And it's better looking. The volumes are more accurate. So things are just getting better. It's a very exciting category for me.
I always like to, when I'm in the office, to go back and check them out and see what they're developing stuff for, that day and see how they do it. It's a very cool process to go and check out.
Absolutely. I agree with that. When you guys come down here again, it's okay for me to say that we've renovated almost all of that. The core fiberglass area, obviously the changes that we had from the pictures that Rob showed to where we are now, there's significant changes there. But the changes like on the finishing area where the guys were doing the carpeting work, radically different. That whole thing. When Rob showed the pictures of the naked boxes, the naked pictures that he showed online, that area is radically transformed now, much more open. It's a completely different facility. The R&D guys are actually moving, and that area is going to be redone. It's lots of improvements and changes all around production and our ability to do even greater things in the coming months and years. It's really cool. Kevin, Rob, and I, we do tours frequently when people come into the facility, and we get excited about it. We talk about how the factory is like a living organism, and it's changing and modifying and morphing all the time. You guys won't even recognize it, Kevin, Rob. It's so unbelievable, all the changes that we've made. And I'm sure that we're going to be able to share some images once, everything, gets all settled in. Some of the bigger parts of the move are still being finalized. And after that, I'm certain that Andy and maybe Mark are going to come through with the cameras and take some really killer images and show off.
Nice. I mean, it's crazy just in the past year with, quieting that area down and really, some better downdraft sanding tables and stuff, and just how clean and nice that area has become, considering how dirty that work can actually be.
Yeah, it's not fun. It tends to be messy, it's stinky, and all that stuff. Kevin, you're right. We've done a lot to really improve those conditions. I shouldn't say this in an open forum, but back in the very beginnings of our fiberglass department, it's South Florida, guys. It's hot and it's humid and it's crazy. So wearing some of the outfits that you saw in those images, we were tiny. We didn't know. We had 15 people working there. So the guys would show up in shorts and a tank top, and they'd be hand doing the fiberglass, and they get the fibers in there, and it's terrible. And, people would complain, I don't like working with this stuff. Wear a mask. Obviously, we've gotten a lot better and a lot more mindful, and now it's really state of the art. We've got some really killer stuff going.
Yeah, I mean, our team in fiberglass, they really are unsung heroes because, like you were saying, it's always hot and humid in the warehouse, especially when you get into the summer. And yeah, they're full-on suits to protect themselves from all of those materials, and those poor guys, man. I mean, more power to them because they work hard, and that's why I'm excited to do this training, because there's so many behind not just the processes, but the people involved that don't normally get credit for the end result. And, if it wasn't for their dedication and willingness, we wouldn't have Stealthbox. So,
Anything else, Kev? We good? Rob, you good?
I'm good.
Finishing up a couple comments here on some other random ones there.
Well, obviously, the chit chat at the end here, the session ended already, so you're welcome to go at any time. These conversations don't end when the feed ends. We're always available. You can contact our technical support department, technical@jailaudio.com. Training@jailaudio.com is Kevin, Rob, and I. So if you have any other questions or any feedback or anything that you want us to cover in the future, suggestions on improvements or whatever the case may be, don't hesitate to reach out to us. That's what we're here for.